Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a licensed social worker interviewing social workers, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Cristino Chavez. He is a research associate, PhD student, adjunct professor, LMSW, and immigration court mental health evaluator. Hello, Cristino.
Hello, how you doing?
Good. I know I just gave quite a bit of your spiel, but if you would, could you just introduce yourself a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Of course. So my name is Cristino Chavez, and I am a licensed social worker here in the state of New York. I currently live in the city of New York, so always up on my feet. I am a first generation Salvadoran American. Both my parents are immigrants from El Salvador, and so I had the opportunity and the privilege to be able to get the education and the access to that education here. I also identify as cis male and gay, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And pretty much, uh, I I would say one thing about me is that I'm always a learning person. So pretty much with social work and aligning with social work kind of just was the key to my lock.
Yeah, that's so cool to hear. How did you choose to become a social worker? What did your journey look like into the degree program and everything like that?
So interesting enough, when I was an undergrad, I actually I did my bachelor's in psychology because I had this notion of wanting to become a psychologist. I wanted to go to a psychology program and go about in that route. I was informed by one of my advisors in college that I had enough time and credits to be able to, take and to pursue a minor. And at the time, my college had a minor in social work. So I was like, why not give it a try? I'll just take a class. I already have most of the credits already taken for that minor. So let me just go for it. So I took an intro to social work class. And it was definitely a whole shock to me because in psychology, the curriculum is more so based on the person themselves. It was very, when it comes to abnormal psychology, as they call it, and in my case, I was taking most neuropsych classes. So I kind of wanted to stem between diagnosis and assessment and mental illness along with neuropsych. But like I said, taking social work class was an interesting turnaround. It was basically covering the clinical aspect, which caught my attention, but also broke more into community engagement, like meso-social work and the policy aspect and the research aspect, which was in what you find in macro social work. And I remember one of the professors that was teaching the class, she decided to bring a colleague of hers to do a little guest speaking. And I guess that day kind of sold me into going to social work. I remember this guest speaker saying that she's a director for HR in a nonprofit organization, and she was like when she goes through resumes is not to discredit other professions, but when she sees social workers pop up on her on as applicants, it's one that catches her eye because she herself was a social worker and also knows the curriculum and how much you have to learn and what you have to go through to get to that profession. So it's just like that's it. I'm going for social work. It's definitely something I see myself going into. And so getting into coming across graduation, I was ready set to go, thinking about planning to go to graduate school. I did get into a program right after undergrad, but because of at that time, a lot of social work programs were more so full time, and if you were working, you had to somehow accommodate that. And oftentimes, a lot of programs didn't offer that in my area. Um, at the time, I was living on Long Island, which is neighbors with New York City. But and so I couldn't really didn't have an option or program available for me at that time. So I took a year off, and I would say that year kind of gave me a lot to work with because I will say when I was in college, actually, I myself had involvement with the justice system, which kind of shifted how I saw myself, but also what I gravitated to. It's not a fun story to tell, but in a way, kind of was a silver lining in that. And what I drew myself into going through that experience was how can I, as a person, with the experiences I have, in addition to that moment, I'm also living with bipolar disorder and ADHD for my whole life. So I'm pretty much just getting an understanding of who I am, but also the systems around me that shape the person as who I am is what kind of drew me in the direction of where in social work I wanted to go to. And so from there, I took a year off and then I entered I was able to go into another program, Adelphi University on Long Island. And so in 2016 is when I started my program, and it was a part-time program because not many students have the opportunity to go full-time or have that time and ability to do it. And not to say that it would push anyone who feels that full-time is the only option. Sometimes even for students who do have the time, part-time really helps because of the crunch and the work that's all necessary for it. So I did part-time, and pretty much from there, my first year was focusing on uh, uh, micro social work, clinical practice, therapy. That I want to become a therapist. That was my main goal. And then I took a social welfare class, and that right there, that I just kept. It's like a profession that kind of gets you excited every single time you learn something, that you could do something new.
Yeah.
And so, getting into taking a social welfare class and understanding policy and research, I stuck the rest of my social work education focusing on criminal justice, immigration, and also juvenile justice within social work and how social work is role in that, and and all three platforms. So that's where I would say from that experience and going into the graduate program, and now it's already 3 years after, I will say all these experiences have helped me shift into why and the reasons for being a social worker.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing all of that. It stuck out to me how you mentioned learning the difference in psychology and social work, and how it goes even bigger to where it's not just a single person, it's also their immediate system, and then like the environment beyond that,
Mm-hmm.
and how that is such a difference. And then also being able to kind of pick up a mirror and be like, and how do my different identities and experiences, how can I use them to become strong in social work in different areas? That's really
Mm-hmm.
cool to hear. Thinking to like your time in your program, I know you mentioned the flexibility was something that was beneficial, but what are some other things that you enjoyed during getting your degree?
So I was a very active student. I will say I took every opportunity that was available from the school because I was going to a private institution. I'm paying my buck. I got to make sure I take advantage of anything that comes up. And so when I was in my first year, I was able to take part as a MSW liaison, which was a representative of graduate students in committees and councils on campus, specific in particular to the social work program. Um, Much of the work I did was advocating on issues that a lot of social work students face in the program, whether it's access to certain material or just the issues that students feel that they don't that they're experiencing, that they feel like they need to readjust with faculty members, and then other councils and committees off campus. Actually, at the time, I was very heavy and still am, but I will say at that time it was a prime in my community engagement and looking into more so being proactive in the community. So I was actually invited and would sit on councils through the county, and taking that advantage of something that I feel like has also been a very important part into what I do now. But also, I would say much of the other experiences I was a graduate assistant for 2 years, and I did research assistantship for 2 years as well. So I would say, as much as the classwork was so much, I will say it was also adding to the assistantships that I took on top of the internship experience I've had. We all have to go through, but being able to take on assistantships, both research and graduate, which were paid, and that was the good part. Um, Councils and committees, and even anything that I found could be helpful, whether it's participating or sitting in a workshop, being a panel speaker. So I was always just taking on these opportunities. But I will say that was my experience was always on the ground. I was always doing something.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds, yeah, like you're very involved, which is cool because I bet you probably met a lot of cool people. Yeah, and got to learn new things. Definitely getting the money's worth for the
Yep.
private institution. I feel that. So after graduating, where did you head into social work? What did your journey from student to true social worker look like?
Yeah, so I was first after graduating, I became a program coordinator. This was with the Nassau County's the District Attorney's Crime Community Partnership Program. This was a collaborative program, and at the time, with the district attorney running the office, wanted to make an effort, well, do her effort to engage in the community and develop a relationship with community members and specifically community members of marginalized communities. So I was a part of that program for 2 years. And at the same time, because once you have your social work license, I was able to get it actually that January. So I graduated in August, which was typical for the part-time students. And then in January is when I earned my license, my license in New York State. And from there, still working as a program coordinator, but I was given the opportunity to do fee-for-service psychotherapy work. So it kind of like, so for anyone who's like looking to do psychotherapy, but it's something that they don't want to focus on full time, there are often employers and organizations and agencies that do fee-for-service, which is more so contract and much more working with doing clinical work, but on a smaller scale. And so I did that for several years actually. And aside pretty much moving into that role as a coordinator, things have shifted and I relocated to New York City. And I was offered a position as a psychotherapist. So I had to really get I was just going for the experience. I mean, I was considering and still considering a clinical license, which requires 2,000 hours and the 100 hours. Once you just see the realities of the hours necessary, it just becomes
Yeah.
so much work.
And then
But
another test on top of it.
yeah, and the test, and it's just like, when is it ever going to stop?
Hmm.
But I took the opportunity to go into doing full-time clinical work, and I was working at an agency in Upper Manhattan and in Washington Heights, sorry, Hamilton Heights. Uh, and this is a program that focuses with adolescents. I was a adolescent and child therapist, and gotten for several months actually, being able to understand, and I've been working with youth most of my career, but in particular with clinical work, it's very interesting. And if you plan to do work with children and adolescents, especially in urban neighborhoods or those in high risk neighborhoods, um, it's so complex. And just understanding not just the micro clinical practices of that kind of work can be challenging, but also just the overall aspect of your responsibility as a therapist and everything that's taking place in society and how that affects the work that you do and the clients you work with. So I was working there for several months. And then in last June, actually, was when I was offered an opportunity to sit as a trauma therapist for the Bronx County District Attorney's Office. I was with the Crime Victims Assistance Bureau, so my particular role was focusing on victims who are those who are victims of whether it's assault, sex crimes, sexual assault, uh, child abuse. I've also worked a lot with folks who are family members, friends, or close ones to victims of homicide. So kind of really getting into the deep, I would say the trenches of trauma when it comes to direct trauma, and it's been there for several months actually, almost over half a year or so. And then when it comes to just all this experience, you ask yourself, where can I go to, or how can I continue my growth as a social worker? And I from there was offered a role as a research associate with under the City of New York City University of New York Research Foundation, but in particular with the New York City's Administration for Children's Services. They have what's called the Workforce Institute. And so I'll be working with them in research and evaluation of programs and trainings that are specified through that are conducted through the School of Social Work, Silverman School of Social Work here in New York City.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on making
Thank
that
you.
transition. That is so cool, your journey and how it's all interrelated, but also kept being a step up. Something I'm curious about hearing you talk about being a therapist with specifically lots of trauma. How did you handle that as a person whenever, as a professional, you were going?
I will say therapy. Sometimes we're stigmatized because when people say here that you're a mental health professional, you're a social worker, you do therapy, you must know how to take care of yourself. And I tell myself as I tell others, is we ourselves are also clients. We see therapists. I see a psychiatric nurse practitioner to help me cope with a lot of the experiences I have and I endure during the work. The work is rewarding, of course. It's something that you go home and sometimes you ask yourself, I'm really happy that the news that my client brought home today was something that just like gave me motivation to keep on doing more or find more ways to do things like this. And then there are days just where you just distance yourself from everything. It can be isolating at times because not everyone knows the experiences that you go through. And also we can't talk about the experiences we go through for client privileges and privacy and confidentiality purposes. It's almost like we're trapped with the trauma and just the engagement that we hold. And it may not even just be with clients. It can also just be from your workplace. And if you are working in a toxic workplace, or if you do experience toxicity in interrelations with other coworkers, or if you are in an environment that is heavily traumatic or highly high risk, there's no, and I pretty much tied to that, there is really no field in where you won't experience trauma. I've never heard of a field that's trauma free because unfortunately, and as social workers, we're really good at detecting that. We are trained to really see that and understand it more than the average person. And so we're always finding trauma one way or another. And so going to therapy and just learning to slowly understand more of where I as a person am, and as well as if I'm as a social worker doing my part and it can do the part to take care of myself first. It's setting those boundaries. It's being able to acknowledge that not every responsibility or task is something that you can hold on to. Sometimes making the sacrifice to say, it's like, I can't do this at this moment, or I know that me continuing to take on this role will eventually catch up and burn me out. So
yeah, and I think that's something too that people sometimes will be like, oh, that's selfish, like I should just give myself, when really like setting boundaries helps you then become a better social worker still, because you're still around to do your work and still handle it.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's something that it's also kind of like what I was saying earlier. It's just that a lot of folks just think like you could just, you know the tools, you know how to talk to, just like, you know how to do things. You tell clients all the time how to take care of themselves when they're not when they're going to distress. And we're not the same in that sense that what they may know, I may not know, and what I don't know, they may know, or
and there might be a disconnect where you know everything you're supposed to do, but you can't do it. And like that's where going to therapy can help.
I mean, you could have a whole library of method or approaches to psychotherapy, but when you're experiencing depression firsthand, or you're going through anxiety firsthand, or living with a severe mental illness firsthand, it's easier said than done. It's not something that everyone can simply say, today, you know what, I'm going to use CBT to help make myself get out of this bed. We could like, I wish it could just, there's like a wand and just make that happen. But it's the reality is that we find it difficult and challenging at times, and just being able to take that break
Mhm.
can just do so much.
Yeah, I definitely agree. What advice would you have for prospective social work students or current social work students?
I will say, well, for one, never don't narrow your path in the direction you want to go to. Um, you may want to go into micro practice, which is awesome, but also remember that social work is very, very broad. And there, in the sense that you can go into any field you want to go into. You can do pretty much a lot of the work that you thought you couldn't do. And just understanding that your palette and skills are going to continue to grow. And so is your insight in a lot of the issues you want to focus on. Like I said before, my first goal was to become a psychologist, and I am doing research associate I'm working as a research associate, and I'm also a PhD student, which is something that are completely in, you could say, similar realms, but also just they're just not the same in
Mm.
some aspects. And so it's like your mind continually shifts. You're always thinking of, you're always being exposed and introduced to new concepts of things, into new and also just new outlets. And you're also, it's also, what's important is just understanding that social work is multifaceted. It's very, very different. There's always changing aspects of it, and also just understanding things from a one-on-one or one and family concept to what's happening with the person, what's happening to in the community they live in,
Mhm.
and what is going on in, whether it's our state capital, Albany, or happening in DC, what's happening in legislations, policies, the research that's being done to help us do our work is also a part of social work. And so it's
Yeah.
just being open to letting ourselves know that even though we don't like to learn about policy, or when it comes to this type of conversations, it can become very tiring. I've worked with students when we mention policy, it's just like, how am I going to need this when I'm doing therapy? And best believe things come up where you're going to have to know what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. And that's something that I've seen, like even in doing interviews like this, is that so many people come in thinking, oh, I have this one path I'm going on. And then it's like 5 years down the road and they're like, well, actually, I kind of wanted to grab like a little bit of this part of the
Mhm.
profession and like use my strength and interest over here. And so it's cool seeing how many different types of paths social workers can take. And it's cool too with social workers who have like social media presences, and people can see maybe something that they never would have thought was even an option.
Of course, yeah, no, and that's the thing. It's like we're in an age now where social media and these outlets become are more accessible, or are accessible. And yes, of course, we're in also that era of misinformation, but it's also good to know that there are people, especially in the field of social work, that shed light on a lot of the, whether it's issues that they find are common in the field, or in the work that they do, or just opportunities to let people know that I'm an individual that may identify as X, Y, and Z, and I'm a social worker.
Mm.
We're seeing this diversity in social work, which is so important because we all work in different communities, whether it's working in rural communities, and or working in urban communities, whether it's working with children, teens, adults, whether it's working with severe mental illness or wishing to go into criminal justice or immigration, or even other aspects like palliative care. A lot of folks, every there's so many outlets, like I said before, that you can jump into and you can really learn into. And sometimes it may just be that one client that you meet that shifts your entire focus and interest into a whole different level of care. Like I said, worked a lot with adults, or I used to work a lot with adults, and then just working with a child, and doing psychotherapy was like, what can I do to work with that child, and how this is interesting. The child behavior, children and adolescents and their behaviors are so, it's much more complex. There's so much to learn and so much that we can do and so much that needs to be done. And just getting that experience just from that one person is possible. So it's just being able to understand that what we're doing in social work is always evolving, is always shifting, it's always changing. And also just to point out that sometimes we are going to experience situations like imposter syndrome. We're going to experience um, this sense of self-doubt because as social workers, unfortunately, in society, it's a growing profession, but we still hold a lot of, society tends to hold this concept that we're not psychologists, so we can't be experts, quote unquote, or we're not sociologists, so we can't be experts on a specific field. And so it kind of puts us in a disadvantage, and oftentimes where these feelings of imposter syndrome kick in. It's like, do I feel like I'm good enough for this? And so that those are moments that can happen, but it's always, I always say, like what I tell my students that I teach, who I teach now, that it's regardless of where you go, what you do, and the focus that you have is always remember that the skills that you're gaining from a social work degree is something that you're not going to find anywhere else. You're not going to be able to, you may have a different viewpoint from others that do the type of work, but social work programs are designed to give you that experience in all levels and all different platforms and all different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah. What, either who or what, I guess, has been your inspiration as you go about your life?
I will say much of my inspiration, I'm very big in movements. And when it comes to movements, it's just uh, ways to leaders in movements that really push to address the issues that impact the communities. And so I will say one of my inspirations is Fred Hampton. He was a chapter leader and chair for the Black Panther Party in Illinois. And much of his work was focusing on how to be revolutionary within an era of change that's necessary. And so it's, for me, is seeing that concept in the work that I do, the people that I work with, the communities I try to engage in, and also just myself, because because I would say me myself in the and applying revolution to it is that we're all revolutionary. We're always addressing the biases, the discrimination, the stereotypes, the oppression that exists within the communities that we serve, and oftentimes are working with people who are living in silence. And so I look up to, like I said, I look up to Fred Hampton because he's just someone that did all the work that he can, and also not alone. He did it in teams. He did it with other community members. He did it with folks that are also addressing the issues in this, other systems that they live in and experience oppression through.
Mm. I love hearing that. If people want to follow along with your journey, where can they find you on social media?
So I do have Instagram and I do have Twitter. Both are CNC underscore LMSW. Both are the same for Instagram and Twitter. So I'll be able to share that with you in writing, but definitely can always reach me out there. I always love to engage with folks that have any questions. I usually get folks that recommend individuals to me, or have had people reach out to me through other outlets. And I also have LinkedIn through my name, so I can also add that information there too. But I definitely uh, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram are three places that you will find me.
Awesome. And you're someone that, yeah, it is so fun to see what you're up to, because it seems like it's always something, something new.
Yeah. Every time that, like I said, I'm just always trying to search. There's always never a dull moment. So I'm always trying to figure out what can I do when and how.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to share your insight and your journey and your perspective. I really appreciate that.
Of course, I truly appreciate the time that you've given me, and also just that this is something that's coming into play. The fact that there are more outlets like this, and also recordings and just resources. It's just something that uh, I wish it was available. It was more open when I was in school because it would have gave me more insights to where can I go, who can I go to ask these kind of questions, what can I do, or where can I start. And
Mhm.
so the fact that this is something that is in play, I'm just excited.
I'm so glad you're a part of it. Thank you so much.